Hey, small groups. This weekend we wrapped up the UnAfraid series. I hope you've enjoyed it. We enjoyed going and filming the series and really learned a lot while we were in Israel. One of the most intense moments that we had, it wasn't jumping out of an airplane, it wasn't swimming in the Dead Sea or getting beat up by a girl or going through the tunnel. It was sitting down with individuals who've gone through some incredible pain in their lives. We sat down with some Israeli families, some Palestinian families, and we heard the stories of conflict that they've gone through and how they've lost children in the fighting that's taken place in modern day Israel and Palestine. And as they began to talk about really what life is about. It's about relationships, it's about people, and what they experienced in losing children actually united them together because they've been through this incredible pain and realized that killing is not the answer. A lot of times we think we got a conflict, we got to go kill some people, and they've experienced firsthand the loss of losing a loved one. And so I sat across the table from a dad who lost his daughter to a suicide bomber, and a Palestinian mom who lost her son to some Israeli military through a conflict not allowing her to get her kid to the hospital, ended up dying in critical condition, ended up passing away. And these two sat next to each other and they said they are more brother and sister than some of their own family because of the pain, because of the conflict they've gone through. And now they're advocates for not winning a war through fighting, but winning a war through loving one another. And Chad talked about this parable that Jesus teaches. A parable is a story that has a meaning, and he talks about the Good Samaritan. And it's this made-up story, but he says there's this guy, and he's walking down to Jericho, and he gets mugged, and he gets beat up, and there's these religious guys that walk by and just ignore him, actually avoid him, walk across the other side. And then there's a Samaritan. A Samaritan was a person who, there was a lot of prejudice, a lot of racism against the Samaritans. And Jesus says the Samaritan comes by, and this Jewish man who's been beat up on the side of the road, he stops, he has compassion on him, he takes care of him, he takes care of his wounds, he brings him to a place where he can get nursed back to health, and he says, I'll pay the bill on all of it, and whatever's left over, I'll pay that, I'll come back and make sure all the accounts are settled. And he goes out of his way to care for this person, to love this person. And then Jesus, after he tells this story, he looks to this religious guy who's wanting to justify himself and wanted to stay prejudiced against other people and not show love to other people, and he asks him the question, he says, so who was the neighbor? And the guy can't even say it was a Samaritan because his racism runs so deep in his heart. He says, the one who had mercy. See, a lot of times we think the best way to get a point across is through just, we got to make our point, we got to be angry, we got to write things on social media, I got to send that email, I got to stand up and I just got to protest this thing in a way that just, I pointing fingers at people. And Jesus is saying there's actually something more powerful than hate. There's something more powerful than anger, and it's the power of grace. It's the power of love. Sometimes one of the most courageous things you and I can do is to show love to somebody. Somebody that maybe we don't feel like or think deserves it, but we show love anyway. And when we do that, there's far more power in that moment. There's something supernatural, there's something divine about that, because God in his very nature is love. God in his very essence is gracious. And when we choose love over hate, when we choose to show grace over anger or retribution, when we choose forgiveness over bitterness, what we are doing is we are bringing a little bit of heaven, a little bit of who God is and his very nature on earth. And there's power when we do that. And so I want to ask you this question, and this might be a little more vulnerable in groups, but has there been a time in your life that you've had to choose, instead of using rage, instead of using anger, instead of using violence, to choose love, to choose grace, to choose forgiveness? Is there a moment in your life you've had to do that? Talk about what was the difficulty in choosing to love over choosing to hate, and what was the outcome? So what was that challenge? What was that time you had to forgive somebody? You had to show grace to somebody? And what was that like for you? And then what came from that? And maybe it turned out great, maybe it didn't, but share in your groups a moment that you showed grace, a moment that you showed love, a moment that you showed forgiveness, and talk about what came from that experience. Enjoy the conversation. Again, so glad you're in a group. Keep going.